Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our proposed project plan Return to Travel series. Today, our topic is From Curb to Sky, and we have some great guests on today. The reason that we're having this call, as many of you know, we've had various parts of the industry talk to us about our return to travel, how we have been affected by COVID-19, and we have not had an opportunity to talk about airports and what that means from when you get out of your car to getting to the air and getting through the terminal. So I just want to also talk to you about our organizational team and introduce those folks. So I am Carmen Smith. I am Senior Manager of Travel and Events for ICF. Andrew Wilcox is the Manager of Travel for Europe and Asia for ICF. Charlie Gapron is the Team Leader for Sales for Citizen M Hotels. Roman Neumeister is the Travel Officer for OSCE. Kathy Rigby, she's a Program Manager for Travel, Risk and Safety, CFA Institute. And then on my team as well, Tanya Fairbaugh and Carly Van Dyke. Some housekeeping items for you. This session will be recorded. We ask that you please keep your phones on mute and please turn your camera off. We will ask questions on this particular format as we go along, as if we see them pertaining to that particular topic at hand or the question at hand. However, most questions will be answered at the end of the call. Any questions that are not answered, we will post those on the GBTA Return to Travel think tank site, and also we will provide those answers to you through email. So as you guys know, I am Carmen Smith, and we have done these series since probably April, March timeframe, and we come here on a bi-weekly basis. Well, today I'm excited to have a special guest who will be co-moderating this call with me. And his name is Paul Tillstone with Festive Road. He's a managing partner. Paul and I have had the privilege of having a few conversations lately on just various topics. And Paul he's really a wealth of knowledge within the industry. He's been doing this for over 25 years. He is the co-founder of Festive Road and the specialty of consultancy for that company, and has been twice listed as one of the world's top 25 business travel industry influencers by Business Travel News USA. Paul, welcome to our call today.
Thank you, Carmen. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you.
Marvelous. Whilst you were speaking, I did get a little blackout period. So if for any reason I don't answer, if you ask me something, if you're a little patient, I will come back online at some point. So apologies. Great to be with everybody today. And thank you for asking me to co-moderate with you today, Carmen. What I wanted to do was just spend a couple of minutes setting the scene, then we'll get straight into introducing our panelists and getting them talking to you, and of course getting you to ask your questions in the chat function so that we can ensure that they're asked of them at the end. I looked up a couple of quotes on airports. They fascinate me, and I remember Eric Norberg running for GBTA board a number of years ago, and he talked about the moment that his father asked him in the middle of an airport to close his eyes and listen to all the different international languages around him, and just how it illustrated their ports to the world. I think the other thing about them is they are places, very unique places, and this quote that you can walk around with no shoes, a glazed look on your face, and sleep on the benches and no one judges you is a perfect example of just how unusual airports are. But in many ways, if you can move on to the next slide, they're also like miniature cities. They're very familiar to us. They've got all the components that make a city and all the complexities of what a city comprises of. A few numbers to get you kind of going. 1914 was the first flight between two airports, commercial airports in the world, between St. Petersburg to Tampa, and I'm guessing that's St. Petersburg, USA, not another 4% bucket as well, which I think is called non-operational revenue. And then incredibly, there are 17,678 airports today throughout the world, which is an incredible statistic, because if I hadn't have looked it up, there's no way I would have ever guessed that the number was that high. Now, before we introduce our guests, just one thing that I wanted to show you. Carmen and I have hats that we are going to put on during the course of today. I'll illustrate my hat by popping it on now, and you can see it says confidence. Carmen's hat says safety. And what we're going to do during the course of the conversation, we may put on our safety or confidence hats just to look at things from those perspectives and challenge our speakers to give us a little deeper insight in those particular areas. So if you see us put on those hats, you understand what we're doing. So let's go to the speakers. And first of all, we're going to ask each speaker to say a little bit about who they are, what they do, and illustrate their airport's character with a few statistics or numbers of their own. So Mike Stewart, Vice President from Washington Dulles International Airport. Mike, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. As Paul said, I'm Mike Stewart. I'm Vice President for the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. We operate both Washington Dulles International Airport, where I'm the airport manager, and Washington Ronald Reagan National Airport, as I call it, the sleepy little airport by the river. Both airports run about 24 million passengers a year in normal times. Dulles, just for comparison, to kind of tell you the difference right now. Last year we ran about 1,000 departures or 1,000 flight operations a day. Right now, yesterday we were around 460. Where last year we would have run about 30,000 people through the checkpoint, local boardings, through security. Yesterday we ran 5,200. So we're still dramatically below where we were last year. We want to get back. We are the international gateway to the U.S. and the representative of the nation's capital region. So we are very anxious to get people confident again in flying and working with our airline partners to open our global economy back up again.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Let's introduce Steve. Move on to the next slide. Steve, the Vice President of Operations and Infrastructure at Edmonton Airport. Steve, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon or good morning depending on where you are. Steve Mabey. I've been with the airport for about 28 years in a variety of different capacities. And for us, it's, when the pandemic first happened, our traffic went down by 96%. So we were averaging about 10,000 departing passengers a day. We went down to around 500 or less. We're back up to around 2,000 per day right now. So, which is nice. We are the 5th busiest airport in Canada, but we're also the most northern airport in Canada. So we're really a gateway to the north. So cargo logistics is a huge part of our business, and landmass wise, we're the largest airport in Canada, landmass wise, just over 7,000 acres. So about twice the size of, say, Vancouver Airport that a lot of people are aware of. And we serve about 8.2 million passengers a year is what our kind of a mid-size airport.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Steve. And we can move on to our final speaker slide, introduce Angela Geisler, Account Director, North America for Munich Airport. And before Angela introduces herself and a little bit of numbers to illustrate her airport, we've also asked Angela at the end of her introduction to play a short 1-minute video about her airport in a COVID era. And the reason we've done that is because there may be many of you on this call that haven't yet visited an airport post-COVID or during COVID, haven't seen the process changes. And so to get a visual interpretation of what that looks like, we felt was really important. So Angela, over to you.
Thanks, Paul. Yes, I've been managing Munich Airport's sales and marketing initiatives in North America since 2007, promoting the airport as Europe's leading aviation hub. I work very closely with the airlines Lufthansa, United, Air Canada, American, and Delta, who offer direct services from the US, Canada, Mexico to Munich and beyond. We actually had a very successful year in 2019. Our revenues were over 1.6 billion euros for the group, and we had extremely strong traffic growth. Our annual passenger numbers last year were 47.9 million. A very large increase came from the international intercontinental segment, about almost an impressive 9%. So like Mike and Steve, we also saw our numbers drastically reduce, especially the pandemic numbers were reflected in our traffic in April and May, when our passenger figures amounted to about 1% of those from the previous year. For our results that just came in August 31st, we have a decreased passenger volume of about 2/3 in comparison to 2019. So to date, we had about 9.3 million passengers as of August, where last year, same time, it was 32 million. So as you can see, we've been, slowly but surely since mid-June, when the travel restrictions within Europe were lifted, we started to see a slow upward trend. And we're really hoping that the travel restrictions between the US and Germany and Europe, per se, are lifted, or we have some sort of means to ease those restrictions. That would be wonderful. We have seen some increases. The first week in July, we had about 100,000 passengers, and we're also seeing a reconnection to more than 140 destinations worldwide. From North America, we're serving Lufthansa, United, and Air Canada are serving Chicago, LA, San Francisco, Newark, Dulles, Mike. We were very excited when United started the flight out of Dulles, and Toronto. So like Paul said, I wanted to share with you a video so you can see what the airport experience is like during these times and the type of measures as they relate to physical distancing and how we decrease personal contact and increase hygiene measures. So I am going to share that with you right now. Thank you.
We can see your
full screen.
we can see your the video of you at the moment.
Oh, you don't see my, oh, hang on then, hang on. Of course, this worked when we practiced. Now I know why. I need to include system audio. Share screen 2. There we go. Now it'll work.
We just need you to play the video.
Yes, I know.
Okay.
You got it full screen, right?
Yep, that's great.
Okay. Alrighty.
Great.
Thank you, Angela. And, I just want to interject, from a traveler standpoint, a travel manager standpoint, having the airport and knowing and having that confidence to be able to articulate to our travelers is extremely important. I have actually had the opportunity to tour the Washington Reagan Airport a few weeks back and just see the behind the scenes, what was happening with TSA, what was happening with the airlines throughout in the cleaning process. So that is something that is definitely important. I have a question for all of you, and I'm going to start with you, Mike. But talk to me about the period from March to the beginning of the restrictions. I'd like to know how each of you have reacted to that, and what your actions were dealing with the pandemic and the restrictions. Mike?
It seems like it's been a lot longer than March, and actually it has been, because we actually started tracking this virus back in the December timeframe when it was starting to grow over in the China area. And it's been extremely dynamic. We go from, or early on, we were going just about changes from day to day on travel restrictions, what was going to fly, what wasn't going to fly. So in the March time frame, we dropped pretty dramatically when they put all the travel restrictions in place. The initial changes, where we were one of the original 11 funnel cities, didn't have a dramatic impact, because we were able to adjust to it and do the health screening fairly quickly. We're an airport that has 24/7 CDC coverage anyway, so we were able to adapt to that fairly quickly. But when the EU travel ban went into place, so you had EU, China, Iran, all kind of restricted, and then the airlines started canceling service. It got very quiet very quickly around here. And if you've ever been to Washington Dulles International and 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, you just barely can walk through the place. And I was up here, I think it was March the 27th or so, thereabouts, on a Friday afternoon. And I think there were maybe 3 people, including myself, in the terminal. Obviously can't sustain that way, but we started reacting very quickly. Things originally, face coverings weren't part of the answer, but certainly social distancing was, washing your hands was, getting hand sanitizer out. And of course, as we start rolling through all this, you have supply issues on hand sanitizer dispensers and fluid. You've got, I think we've bought out most of the eastern U.S. on plexiglass and making about 400 or so what we call sneeze guards, but the plexiglass shields that we put in front of the ticket counters, gates, basically every interaction point. So it's been an experience, to say the least. After 35 years in the aviation business on both the airline and airport side, I've certainly never seen anything like this. It's going to take us a while to pull out of it, but I think we are moving through it now, and I think hopefully we'll have a vaccine before too long that'll certainly help that. But we're in what I call a trickle up economic mode right now. We're seeing the passengers increase slightly. And for me, that's the whole trick here is we know we're safe. We know how much time we're spending cleaning. We know there are places in the airport where social distancing is just not possible, whether you're on a people mover or whether you're getting on the airplane itself. The best thing we can do is make that as safe as possible and give people the confidence that, there's a lot of places out there where you can get the virus. This is probably not one of the highest risk places that you're going to be, and get people moving again, because that's important not only for us and the airlines, but also for the economies of all of our countries.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Because and Dulles is my home airport, so I have traveled 2 or 3 times this summer. And I will say one of the things that stuck out to me was just getting off the train there, going to baggage claim and having the mask available and the signage that says, Virginia requires mask. And so that was, and I was able to take a couple of those masks for me and my family and use those masks. In fact, I still have those, which they are washable and durable. So thank you for that. And I did feel safe within the airport. Steve, let's talk to you about, can you answer that same question from a Canadian or Edmonton perspective?
I can, and I'll go back a few more months from that. When we started hearing about the virus, and this goes back into December of 2019, we started hearing some rumblings around this. We pulled our pandemic plan that we developed during SARS off the shelf, and we started redoing it. And our projections were 50% traffic loss, 50% staffing loss. We hit 96% in March. So it was, you can't plan for that because nobody plans for almost 100% of their business gone overnight. So very difficult. Our reaction to that has been incredibly nimble and flexible, as we all have to be, because changing regulations, changing restrictions through the last 6 months has been ongoing. Some days it's daily, some days it's weeks, it's weekly. But we immediately went in and looked at our new traffic loads and what kind of our projections would be. We reduced our building footprint by 40%. We've unfortunately had to reduce our staffing by approximately 40% as well with permanent layoffs. And we had to start accommodating a growing number of aircraft that needed to be parked just because they weren't flying anymore. So, you know, going back to our days of 9/11, aircraft are now not flying. And all of a sudden we have all these aircraft parked and finding positions for them on top of the MAX that's already parked. So those are just real life, real decisions you have to start making. And we started working with health authorities right away. So, you know, we talk about the additional cleaning and putting out dispensers of hand sanitizer and all those things right away. Of course, as Mike mentioned, we had supply issues. Luckily, we do a lot of work with cargo, so we have a lot of connections into Asia. So we started getting supplies brought into it, and we became a hub for supplies. So we had 747-800s, and we had Antonov 124s full of medical supplies coming in. We became a distribution point early on in this. In fact, we started distributing and getting some of the supplies for some of the local emergency response services within the city here because they had nothing. So we started supplying others because we actually had this planned in advance. But some of those things within the terminal, such as dispensers of hand sanitizer, those did become very difficult to get. And now we have them throughout. But those additional measures and additional cleaning and additional process is going to be something passengers are going to, it's going to be different for people as they experience that new journey through the terminal. And, you know, videos like Angela showed, and we have a video as well, a little bit longer that I think will be attached to this afterwards. It's about restoring that confidence now and trying to move forward. And I know later on we'll get into testing and some other things, but it was day by day, and we immediately sent all our staff home. Everybody worked from home except for a few critical operational folks that need to be on site, but we put in restrictions for them as well. We're slowly bringing back some folks. My maintenance teams are back fully now. Being a winter airport, winter's coming very quickly, so we're hiring for those folks as well. So they need to be on site, but all of our office and admin staff are still working from home. Thank you.
Thanks. And Angela, how was Munich? How did they respond?
So basically the crisis mode started for us, I think it was around March 18th with the border closings. Thank goodness Germany considered Munich to be a critical infrastructure, and we kept open along with Frankfurt Airport. We were there to handle, you know, the repatriation flights to bring passengers to their homes. And like Mike said, too, we had a lot of cargo flights that were operating, especially during that time, transporting medical supplies. And as a backdrop to these sharp declines, Munich Airport, and it's actually called Flughafen München GmbH FMG, which handles Munich Airport and its subsidiaries, had to implement far-reaching measures to secure the airport's liquidity. We set measures group-wide to impose tight limits on personnel. There was drastic hour reductions and material costs, and any investment projects were postponed indefinitely or until further notice. Munich Airport has two terminals, Terminal 1 and Terminal 2. Terminal 1 is all other airlines besides Star Alliance. Terminal 2 is Lufthansa and Star Alliance. And at that time, we closed down Terminal 1 completely, and we closed down the satellite part, which we have a midfield satellite terminal attached to Terminal 2. That was closed as well temporarily. So at that time in March, all arrivals and departures at Munich Airport continued. All of them were continued to be operated through the one terminal, through Terminal 2, the Lufthansa Star Alliance terminal. And of course, protecting the health of passengers and employees at Munich Airport remains and was our top priority. Just within days, we actually also had ordered all of these disinfectant stands and had them installed. We started installing immediately social distance signaging all over. We'll get into that later, I think, as we progressed. And then also plexiglass barriers wherever passengers would have contact with airport or airline personnel. And also at the same time, all of our retail stores were immediately shut down. The only thing that was open were the banks and pharmacies and our medical center at the airport. So that was basically the immediate impact of what impacted us. It's very similar to all of us airports around the world, I'm sure.
So Carmen, I'm going to pop on my confidence hat because, you know, now we've got the context of how these airports were affected. I'd love to talk about the efforts that the airlines have gone to create that confidence. Bruce Kopkin has provided a comment in the chat function saying the public doesn't know all the efforts that airports have taken to make them safe. And I think there's probably maybe a couple of different angles to talk about here. The sort of internal operational component of safety are those that you have direct control over, like, for example, you know, the operational functions inside the airport. Then you've got those where you don't have direct control. So that might be lounge provision or limo pickup from the curbside. And then I would say you've got external, which is how you're communicating to the wider public about confidence within the airport. And then I'd also say there's an opportunity here that stuff that always needed fixing, we've got a chance to fix it. And there's some stuff that is just needed now. So with this kind of instilling confidence hat, let's go to you three and just ask about what efforts have you gone to restore confidence? Give us some really interesting illustrations. Who would like to go first? No pressure.
Well, I'll start up since I went first the first time. Yeah, I think there is no magic formula here. I think it's everything works for your audience. So obviously in this day and time, the first thing you do is try to get your message out in social media, because that's what, you know, most of the younger generation is going to see. But we also do some of the old-fashioned signage and those types of things. But here in the airport, we're doing, we have announcements running about every 10 minutes, reminding people healthy habits, and have had since early March. We try to make, as to the extent possible, our cleaning efforts visible, either through video or just seeing, you know, today, a lot of people know the mobile lounges here at Dulles. When you pull in on a mobile lounge now, before the next group gets on, you see the cleaners go on and wipe it down. If we have a known positive come through the airport, we have hydrostatic sprayers that go through our cleaning crew. They look like spacesuits, walk around spraying everything. And you see that same technology being used by the airlines on the aircraft itself. In fact, I just read an article this morning on United's efforts in using robots to go through and electronically spray inside the aircraft. So those are the types of things that I think you'll see, and those types of practices, regardless whether it's COVID-19 or any other pandemic or virus that we're facing. You know, we learn something every time we go through one of these. And getting out and just letting the public know what you're doing, what you're trying to do. We did something in the middle of this that probably you wouldn't do normally. Is we had started construction on a third curb for our TNCs, our Uber and our Lyft operations. It's not very busy right now, so you know, why push it out? But what we've determined is the traffic is trickling up. Our arrivals curve started backing up. A lot of people now are, instead of parking or doing something else, they're coming to the airport to pick up their loved ones. Well, that combined with the TNCs was pretty much crowding our arrivals level. So we went ahead and opened that new third curve, and we've separated now the people that are out waiting on Uber and Lyft versus the people that are waiting on friends and family. So just those types of things to kind of instill that we are watching out for you. We want to make it safe for you.
I find the you know, the idea of really visible cleaning crews within the airports it's a really interesting one because I was speaking to somebody yesterday, and it was from Qatar Airways, and they said, you know, we introduced hazmat suits for the cabin crew, and my comment was that it's a double-edged sword, really, because on the one hand, when you're on the flight and you're experiencing somebody completely PPE'd up for your protection, it's really comforting. But images of crew in a hazmat suit before you book the flight actually could make you think, oh, wow, is this worse than I thought it was? You know, I was kind of interested in flying, but now I'm really worried. So is there a communication needed around the same time as you distributing these sort of like high-end cleaning squads in high visibility? Is there messaging that you provide at the same time?
Speaking just for us again, I would tell you the messaging evolves, absolutely. As we've moved through this, I mean, you remember early on, face coverings were for the sick person, not for everybody else. And we've obviously come full circle on that. So you constantly are updating your messaging, and I think we'll continue to do so as we move through this.
Yeah, the face coverings is interesting. I remember the first time I went to Asia and saw lots of people in face coverings and thought, oh, they're obviously very paranoid about getting stuff from other people. It's only later on that I realized that they were carrying a cold and they were concerned about passing it on to people. So it's a completely different mindset. Angela, when it comes to different cultures, so let's look at Germany, are there any sort of considerable variances in the plans that you've made and the processes you've introduced to instill confidence compared to the US, or is it pretty much the same?
I think as far as, you know, the face masks being mandatory for all employees and passengers, the age might vary. At our airports, it's you have to wear them 6 years of age and over. I think that's an issue because I think some of the airlines in the US have stricter regulations, but I don't know what it is at the airports. But for us at the airport at 6 years old, we really started to produce extensive social signage, social distancing signage. I mean, I even have statistics on it. Like we have 9,370 floor markings in the main process area along the passenger's journey. I mean, that's huge. Yeah, in our seating areas, we have 6,890 signs to make sure that people social distance. In our shops and restaurants, we have over 5,000 signs. Even in our elevators, we have over 6,000 signs because some only allow 2 people, some only allow 4. So we have to always constantly remind them. Like Mike said, we have multilingual announcements, usually in English and German. I don't know how many languages, but I know English for sure is part of that. Every 15 minutes with the hygiene instructions, we have staff walking around to remind people. Because again, when people travel, sometimes they're a little stressed, their energy levels are a little high, they might forget to put the mask on, they might forget to distance because they're distracted. So we constantly want to help them do that. We also have over 600 digital displays throughout the airport. And then, of course, I don't know if you want to get into that now, but for us, virus testing has become the main instrument in fighting that the pandemic does not spread. I mean, it first started with a rapid testing for a charge that was, I think, towards the end of June. So if you wanted to get a test, you could go to our medical center and do that when you arrived. And then it was free of charge for on a voluntary basis in July. And then less than a month later, it became mandatory. So when you land now in Munich, it's free of charge mandatory testing if you're coming from a risk area. So for instance, the US is considered a risk area, so all passengers do the test. It's the medical, the ministry in Germany has done a lot of research, and throat swab is the test that we do. And it's also much more comfortable and quicker to do. So that's what we do. And then I think if you're coming from Canada, it's optional because it's not considered a risk area. And it takes several days to get the test results. So I have a feeling that eventually sometimes it doesn't, it depends on the volume. That'll change. I think the testing will become quicker and quicker.
Yeah, I think I saw yesterday Rome had introduced, or one of the Italian airports has introduced a trial as well. I think you're absolutely right that actually the accuracy of the tests and the length of time to get the results is a major step towards building confidence. So I guess lastly, Steve, just before we move on to a question from Carmen, are there any processes that you've had the chance to fix, which have always been a bugbear at airports, but COVID's given you an opportunity to fix something? Are there any sort of silver linings to this cloud, and/or is there anything different you've done at Edmonton?
Yeah, I think, when this first started, one of the things we as an airport adopted was a saying that never let a good crisis go to waste.
Yeah.
So it allowed us to step back and really reimagine everything we do. So we've tried to take an incredibly difficult time for all of us and try to reimagine and change some of our process. So we are, even through our digital strategy and our technology, we're looking at expediting some things that would have taken 2, 3 to 5 years. We're reimagining those things and trying to look at how do we change that overall passenger experience through the process. And we talk about touchless, we talk about all those different aspects, but we're looking at all those types of things and how can we do a different job. But it's really changed how we do things. You talk about cleaning. We used to look at doing cleaning when there's no passengers around. Now we want cleaning to be done when passengers can see it, because they want to see that it's being cleaned. They want to experience it, because now it restores that confidence. And early on, we adopted kind of a 3-phased approach around, first that COVID-19 messaging, crisis messaging, and then we moved into kind of a keep dreaming campaign, because we wanted the travel industry to remain relevant. So on our social media, we couldn't say, because of the restrictions, hey, get out there and travel, because that would be kind of flying in the face of what government's saying. But we wanted people to keep dreaming. So we started producing, keep dreaming about flying to Munich, keep dreaming about going to Hawaii, wherever. And we had a whole campaign around that. That will transition once some of the restrictions open up, and transition into, okay, now it's time to fly, time to go. And all of our social media has been around everything what we're doing around cleaning, new process, what to expect. Our video, we have a video as well, as I mentioned, and it's around, here's what to expect at the airport. Here's what's going to be different for you, and here's why it's safe. And I think people need to know that, quite honestly, airports are probably safer now to fly through from a virus and germ type of perspective than ever before, and same with the airlines themselves. It's never been as safe, and you're probably at less risk to get something through that process than you are if you're going to go to the local grocery store, just because of restrictions and the emphasis and all the great work that all of us have been doing in this industry to really force it to recover. We're pushing it, and we as an industry have to be the leaders, because government's going to follow. They can't move fast enough. At least in Canada, they don't move that fast. So we as an industry have to lead it, push it, and force it through.
Well, great. Thanks, Steve. And talking about safety, and as you guys can see, I have my safety hat on, because that is truly something that is important to all of us who are travelers and those of us who manage travel. What I'd like to ask all of you are, what are some of the lessons learned? And then also, what best practices have you guys put into play that maybe you can share with us? And then also, how have you garnered the feedback from your stakeholders who are traveling? I know every company is not on lockdown as we are. Our essential travelers are working, but I'd like to know, number one, again, what lessons have you learned? 2, what best practices have you worked together to put in place? And then 3, how have you garnered your feedback so that you can ensure that your stakeholders are satisfied? And whoever wants to answer can certainly step in.
Well, I can continue and just start. some of the best practices. So we early on started working with our airline partners because the airlines were very quick out of the gate with their new cleaning protocols on board the aircraft. So we engage with them because we want that experience that passengers are seeing on the plane to actually start before they even get there. So back at check-in, back at the curb. So we started working with them saying, let's communicate together. So we started partnering with them on that, along with our food and beverage outlets, along with duty free, along with some of our other partners in the industry, because it's going to take the industry together to work through this. And it's not any one group or one airport or one airline. We all have to work on this together. The other best practice is engaging with our government health officials early on, because they needed to see what's happening at airports and what we're doing, so they understand when they're making health related decisions and safety decisions, how it affects an airport and what it means. Early on, they want to do temperature screening and different things at airports, and we took them for a tour and said, here's what that means. And they modified some of the protocols and process, because now they understood what it actually means in an airport. If we adopted everything, and you even go back to social distancing, if we continue social distancing at airports, we're going to need terminals 10 times the size they are today to accommodate the lines. Social distancing is not feasible going forward through recovery. So we have to find other solutions. Cleaning, face masks, are all that. Social distancing is not one of them. It's just not possible. So working with them so they understand how it is. So those are things that we did early on to as a lesson learned, make sure they're part of our decision making and working. And quite honestly, we have to lead them by the hand a little bit on that too, especially when we get into the testing at airports and what that means, because that's a whole bigger piece. But as an industry, we can work through that together.
Quick question before move on to the other ones. So you talked about social distancing and all of that, and probably needing more capacity in order to do that. Has there been any tweaks to that philosophy in terms of continuing social distancing? We all have realized how susceptible we are to traveling and the amount of people that we come in proximity to. So how do you see maybe continuing that, given the space that you have?
We're like Angela said, we have a lot of signage and stickers around as well. We're encouraging spacing wherever you can, and you find that nowadays people are just naturally doing that anyways. They're finding that open space where they can. So we'll continue that where we can. We've spaced out some of our security lines and things like that as much as we can. So we'll continue, but there will become a breaking point at some point. We also gate our aircraft so that the busy gates aren't right next to each other as they were before. We've actually spaced them out, so there is actual space, but that works for now. At some point, that will no longer be viable. We were early on to adopt face coverings in the airport before it was even required through regulation. And actually in Edmonton, where our airport's located, in the terminal building, we're not even regulated to have face masks unless you're getting on board the aircraft or going through security. But we made it mandatory through the building months ago, just to give that confidence, comfort, and we knew that social distancing wasn't permitted. We also increased all the cleaning and everything else. So we're finding other ways, but it's adopting some of these strategies early on.
Steve, Mike or Angela, do you have anything to add?
Go ahead, Mike.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Angela.
I just wanted to talk about the social distancing. We're basically total agreement with what Steve is saying. We also right away worked with the airlines to come up with, like making sure our masks are for the most part in line with the same age group and things like that. We also work with the European Union Aviation Safety Agency. And what they have done in Europe is we're an example, as are about 5 or 6 other airports in Europe. on how to basically demonstrate recommendations on what works as far as stopping or the anti-infection rate measures, as well as the European Center of Disease Prevention and Control. So for instance, the goal is to have these hygiene measures standardized throughout European airports. Everything they're taking a look at everything from check-in and baggage drop processes to make sure that everything's as contact-free as possible. All stages of the air travel are taken into account, starting from the moment the passengers enter the building, as they continue through check-in, go through security, the customs process, and even extending to the time that passengers spend on board the aircraft. So again, we are working very closely with our airlines that serve our airport. And we are Europe's only 5-star airport. So we actually, our CEO has said numerous times, we actually have to set an example on this level. As far as the social distancing, right now, because the traffic is not, near the 2019 levels, we did close down our satellite terminal on Terminal 2. The reason that terminal was originally built was because we didn't want to have crowds at the airport. So the Lufthansa Star Alliance terminal built a separate satellite. So when volumes pick up, again, we will open that satellite and then there will be more room and there won't be people crowding on top of each other. We also have a short minimum connecting time at Munich Airport. We're known as a transfer hub for people traveling throughout Europe. And because of that, we stagger our flights accordingly so that there aren't that many crowds at the airport. So hopefully we can kind of get around that social distancing as well as traffic picks up.
And I would just, I would say that both Angela and Steve touched on all the primary points that I would just go back and kind of reemphasize something that Steve said. We started off you wore a face covering when you could not social distance. Now you're seeing it's kind of evolved to that situation where it's expected that you wear a face covering and social distance. But to Steve's point, especially in the U.S., the U.S. airports are pretty much a cost recovery mode. So whatever it is we build, we go out and sell bonds, whatever it is, come back and finance to build what it would take facility-wise, social distance, everything. That cost goes back to our airlines and ultimately through the airlines to the passenger tickets. Nobody would be able to afford to fly if you go in and try to do social distancing everywhere. So I wholeheartedly agree with Steve. We have to figure out a way to work through this and find out what the right answers are. We've been in a very dynamic situation up until now, and we're adjusting and learning every day. Being where I am, as you can imagine, we have a lot of federal visitors. I'm blessed in that we've got a fantastic team here at Dulles. All the federal partners, we work hand in hand together just about every day. The port director with Customs Border Protection, the federal security director with TSA, the officer in charge for CDC, the FBI, the State Department, you name it. We're together just about every day. And that's what it's all about, is working together to try to find things that make sense and then be able to convince the traveling public that we are watching out for them and this is the best way to do it.
Thank you, Mike. I just wanted to remind, we've got about 11 minutes left. I just want to remind all the people listening in, you have got a chance to ask questions in the chat function. Please do. You've only got the next 11 minutes to do that. In the meantime, whilst you're thinking about your question, I just wanted to build on your comment, Angela, about your contact with the European Aviation Safety Agency. And Mike, you referenced working with a number of bodies. Pre-COVID, I always had a challenge with some of the airports that had very different practices in place. So if I think about security, some places required the belt off, some didn't, depended on the machines that were in place and policies. And that's not even between countries. Sometimes that's airports within countries. How do you ensure more joined up thinking when something is as important as getting the right safety procedures in place so the traveler can essentially predict their journey? Because if it's different wherever you go, it causes that stress and anxiety if they're not sure what to expect when they get to the other end. And what data do you look at to ensure that you're creating that consistency? Mike, any comments on that?
I was just going to follow on what I said, Paul. One is those group meetings with all the stakeholders, but you've got to broaden it out from that. And we spend a lot of time talking to the other airports, to the industry organizations such as ACI and AAAE. You've got to get all that feedback. And then the reality is we can decide whatever we want to here locally, but all these federal agencies have headquarters. And getting that information back to them and getting them all on the same page is still part of it. So it's just a continual group effort to try to get everybody on the same page. I think that somebody mentioned it earlier. If you've seen one airport, you've seen one airport. That is true in a lot of ways. Every airport, whether it's the infrastructure, the facility itself, everything's a little bit different sometimes. But we want to standardize the experience for the customer to the extent that we can, and that takes everybody kind of putting their heads together.
And Steve and Angela, it's connected to Carmen's feedback loop question. Do you engage with the business travel community to understand where there may be lacks of consistency or there may be challenges for buyers? So in order to create that joined up thinking, it's not just about connection with government and other airports, it's also connection with our business travel sector.
Yeah, we actually conducted just about 4 or 5 weeks ago a bit of a sensitivity analysis where we sent it to out to the community and out to some of our business advisory groups that we have, asking about travel, asking about safety, asking about what they expect, it's good information to get back, and then we share that with the airlines as well, and the airlines are doing it as well, and they're feeding it back to us as well, so that we can look at, okay, what parts of the travel are people anxious about, and we can modify that. And we're lucky through airports that we have, ACINA, and we have other organizations where we come together and talk about facilitation through airports, and we share ideas. And those groups existed before this, so we already have relationships. So, ACINA, I sit on the facilitation committee. We talk about all this, what we're talking about today, so that we can try to have some consistency through the process for the passenger.
Okay, and Steve, is that sort of research or the survey results, is there anything in that it would be worth sharing with the business travel manager community, with the buyer community?
There is, yeah. Well, I think so, because it'd be probably consistent across the board. I bet you, doesn't matter what city you go to, I bet you the top 3 items would be somewhat similar. But we can look at summarizing that a bit and sharing that.
That would be great. Thank you. And Angela, finally, before we move on to our last question now, how do you ensure joined up thinking with the likes of airports in Germany and those in the United States, for example?
Well, I don't know if you heard about the harmonized travel restrictions right now that just came into effect at the beginning of September. The European Tourism Manifesto Alliance actually is taking the approach and organizing this so that they can rebuild traveler confidence and improve the cross-border travel so that everything is kind of standardized, especially in the Schengen area of Europe. So they're establishing common criteria and thresholds to identify like where the risk areas are. They're doing some sort of a color code system. They're trying to come up with common measures so that when people depart and return from areas, they don't have to necessarily perhaps quarantine. They want to replace that with testing and tracing. They are coming up with a new web platform called Reopen the EU. So they're working as far as the airports, they're working in conjunction with the countries to do this. And then also, as far as what we're doing from a corporate travel perspective, I have been joining webinars with all of our airline partners and presenting from an airport perspective so that we hear what the corporate travel community, what their concerns are. And of course, a lot of it is the travel restrictions. but there are exceptions to those travel restrictions, and they're continually changing. IATA has a really good resource where you can go on there and check that. So there are quite a few people that are starting to travel for business. For instance, if they don't have management capabilities at the European facilities, it's considered a necessity for them to travel there, and they have been doing that. They just have to make sure. A lot of them have lawyers and they have the correct documentation to expedite that. And they're very happy to learn everything that we're doing, you know, to keep them healthy and safe during these times when they travel and transfer through the airport itself.
Angela, I have a quick question. Excuse me, Paul. I want to ask, because something that is very important to us as travel managers, you know, you talked about the testing at the airports. Is that a rapid ready test where the results are immediate? Because, you know, as you know, when you're on business travel, quarantining for so many days or, you know, extended amounts of time can also affect the ROI of, you know, people don't have that time to quarantine for 14 days or several days. So can you tell us about the time frame in which that testing does occur and how quickly the results are presented?
It is a rapid test, but it depends on the volume of people that are traveling through. So at first, it's basically, we say it takes a few days just to be safe. You know how it is here. I don't know if they've had the test done. They'll tell you it's going to be available in 3 days and it takes 7 days. It's shorter than that in Germany. Usually they'll say it takes about 48 hours. And I know that they are working. I spoke with somebody at Lufthansa recently who's specifically working on this as well. And they have said that they're trying to get tests that are going to be available within, you know, I don't know, less than 8 hours, hopefully. And then probably I think that time, as this evolves, will get shorter and shorter, and people will probably have their test results within, like, I don't know, a few hours. We do advise that people should quarantine during that time, but they can go on to wherever they were going, to their hotel, and then they would get, you know, a text or an email with their results, whether it's positive or negative, and how they can proceed. But that's kind of how the process is working right now, and I know they're looking at trying to improve that time frame.
Now, before we hand back to Carmen to close off, I had one final question for you. And if I can ask you to expedite your answer, like you're going through a fast track service security lane. Post 9/11, we saw some security changes which have lasted with us to today, and they'll last with us for the next 10 or 20 years. Can you think of one thing with a 30-second answer each that you think will remain with us at airports as a result of COVID? Angela, would you like to go first?
Sure. I would think the disinfectant dispensers will always be there. I think we've always, I don't know if Germany has kind of this reputation of being a very, very clean anyway. We really upped the ante on that. I'm sure that's going to continue. In the interim, we are having the COVID testing, which is mandatory from risk areas. So I see the testing until we have a vaccine. I think that will be what our airports in Germany will be focusing on.
Okay, great. Thank you, Steve.
I think I agree with Angela. I think it'd be some of the disinfectant. I think expedited touchless places for passengers. I think the process for them to go from curb to gate will be expedited through technology, biometrics, and so forth. So it's an easier transition. That is one of the benefits out of it.
Great, Mike.
And I would agree with what Steve just said. I think the number one thing that you'll see is touchless technology, whether it be facial recognition or other means of not having to touch anything. That'll be the number one thing. And I think there will this continued emphasis on disinfecting and sanitizing will continue to be an area of interest. I personally think possibly the plexiglass screening may be something that sticks around. I would think that over time, some of the other things, face coverings, those kind of things, at least in the U.S., will probably fade to the background.
Great. So creating a touchless, seamless, and healthy journey for the future. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to Carmen then to formally close the event.
Great, and thank you, all of you, Steve, Angela, Mike, for joining us. Paul, thanks for co-moderating with me. We did get a one question at the end, which we will pass on. It's what about, and maybe you guys can be thinking about this, what about if and when the virus increases? Is there any forward thinking on that front? We will get those answers from our guest, pass those along and post those along with our post-call follow-up and the recording of this call. Also, there have been some presentations that each of the guests have. We will also include that in our follow-up so that you can have additional information. And we certainly thank you again for another great call. Thank you, airports, because that has been a question on our minds for a long time. We've talked to the airlines, we've talked to other aspects of the travel industry, but knowing what occurs from curb to sky in between and getting from your curb to the airplane has always been a question of ours. So again, thank you very much, everyone. We will see you in 2 weeks. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Paul.